What is up guys, Alex from Lakey Wargames here and welcome to today's Nighthaunt Army List video. Now today I'm going to be taking you through my revised 2000 point Nighthaunt Army List for the brand new 2023-24 General's Handbook Andtor. Alrighty guys, so welcome to today's video. We're going to be taking a look at my new 2000 point army list for Nighthaunt. Now if you hadn't seen it, a few days ago I released a video about Nighthaunt and why they are struggling to win in 3rd edition. We looked at the stats from the Honest Wargamer team, and Nighthaunt are currently the 3rd lowest win rate faction of all the factions. They are technically the 4th lowest win rate faction, but we are ignoring Cities of Sigmar because we all know their new book is round the corner, so for all intensive purposes those stats will be irrelevant when their new book drops very soon. So we looked at the win rate about Nighthaunt and why they were struggling in 3rd edition and some of the problems that you will face as a Nighthaunt general. Now this got me thinking, with the new season around the corner, are there some new tricks and things that we can pull to try and help Nighthaunt be in a better position? So that made me revise my old Nighthaunt video list from about 11 months ago, and here we are today with this brand new list. So if you're not familiar with my army list breakdown videos, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the army list up on the screen for you to take a look at. We're going to read through all the army list first. I'll read it all through, and then I'm going to go back through the list and sort of fine comb it, explain why I've taken what I've taken and what it's doing in the list for us. Just a little sort of a heads up, this list is just the one graphic on the screen, so if you're hobbying or just listening along, continue to do so. There's nothing really to watch once you've sort of read through the list, and like I said, I will be reading it out to you, so this will be a sort of perfect video for you to put in the bag while you're hobbying away and something to just listen to. So with all that said, let's just get on into it and let's look at that new 2000 point list. So our faction is Nighthaunt, our sub-faction is the Emerald Host, and our grand strategy is Dismantle the Brave. We have quite a few heroes in this list, starting with Lady Olinda, and her spell is Spectral Tether. We have Alrich the Drowner. We also have a Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed. He is our general, his command trait is Spiteful Spirit, and he has the artifact which is the Soulfire Ring. We also have a Guardian of Souls who has another artifact which is the Midnight Tome, and his spell is the Seal of Shaiish. To round out our heroes we have a Lord Executioner as well. There's 4 battle line in this list, and the first one is a 20-man block of Grimghast Reapers. We have 2 units of 5 Hex Wraiths, and the last unit in there is 3 Spirit Hosts. We also have 1 Black Coach in this army, and for endless spells in this list we only have the one, which is the Mortalis Terminexus. There are 2 battalions in this list. The first one is the Battle Regiment, and the second one is a Command Entourage, which is Magnificent. We've chosen the artifact for that, which is why we've managed to have 2 artifacts, one on the Knight of Shroud and one on the Guardian of Souls. This list is 2000 points on the dot. There are 0 points of allies. We've only used 1 reinforcement points on the Grimghast Reapers. It has 91 wounds in total and comes to 4 drops. So now that we've seen the list, let's get on into it and break it down. Starting with the sub-faction choice of the Emerald Host. Now the reason I went Emerald Host is because, well, the other 3 don't really benefit this list at all. We don't really have the other units that affect the other 3 traits, so Emerald Host was really our only choice. But to be honest though, I think Emerald Host has some really good power in the new General's Handbook. The reason for that is the Andtorian Locusts are all non-unique wizard heroes who have 9 wounds or less, so a lot of people are including in their list lots of little 5 wound heroes again. So that means being able to hit them for D3 mortal wounds at the top of every battle round is some really good chip damage. If they're running multiple heroes, even being able to use their heroic recovery to be able to heal themselves, if you're hitting multiple heroes at the top of every battle round for D3 wounds, they're not really going to be able to heal that back too fast. As well as that, we also have a lot of different ways to cause mortal wounds within this list, as we'll get into that a little bit further. But once you start stacking multiple mortal wounds on top of each other, these little 5 wound heroes, when they're getting hit D3 at a time, are really going to crumble very fast. Now obviously we get to pick D3 plus 1 different units. Whenever you use the Emerald Host, I always recommend just basing your tactic on being able to hit 2 different enemy units or heroes. The heroes are the key thing we're going to be going for, the small little 5 wound guys if you can. If you end up getting 3 or 4 units for your Emerald Host damage, that's fantastic. Then it's sort of icing on the top of the cake. But those 5 little wound heroes are the main thing that we're going to be targeting with our Emerald Host. Next up, for the grand strategy, I went for Dismantle the Brave. Now this is one of the grand strategies that is out of the Nighthaunt Battle Tome, and after deployment but before the first battle round, you pick the enemy unit with the highest bravery characteristic. If there's more than one that has the same, so say they've got multiple units with 10 bravery, then you actually get to choose the target for Dismantle the Brave. And basically you get your grand strategy when at the end of the battle, you complete it if that target unit has been slain. Now I really like this one because if you're fighting something like other death factions where there's sort of 10 bravery all across the board, you can pick one of those little 5 wound heroes that we spoke about earlier, and with your Emerald Host and other damage that we're going to have in this list, you can cut down a 5 wound hero absolutely no problem, score your grand strategy by sort of turn 2, turn 3. There are obviously going to be games where you're playing against, say, like Slaves to Darkness, and the highest thing they have on the board is like an Archaon, and we all know how annoying that is to kill. But that's just kind of the way it goes, and to be honest, I don't really like any of the others out of the book, and I wasn't too impressed for Nighthaunt for any of the others outside of the in the grand strategies. Guardian of Souls, if he was our general, we could possibly go for the spellcasting Savant. Obviously keep your Andtor in a Locus by the end of the game, but we've got the Knight of Shrouds in here because we have the Spiteful Spirit and Soulfire Ring combo set up. So if he wasn't our general, we wouldn't be able to use Spiteful Spirit, and it kind of ruins the whole strategy around him. So thus we had no access to Spellcasting Savant, so that's why we went with Dismantle the Brave. And like I said, in those situations where you get to choose which one the target is, you can make the target something really, really easy. You could even pick a 10-man battle line unit for your enemy if it's tied for the highest bravery. So it is something that's quite easy to score in the majority of games. Like I said, you'll get some rough matchups with it, but there's a lot of damage in this list, so even someone like an Archaon, if you play your cards right and hit him with everything you've got at once, you do have a nice chance to bring him down. Now this list sort of breaks down into 2 main parts. This list is very dependent on matchup, and depending on who you're facing, the type of list, you kind of have to be able to see it coming. I wouldn't recommend this list for a beginner because it is something that takes quite a lot of skill to be able to pilot. The main thing for this list is going to be the 20 block of Grimghast Reapers. They are usually going to be accompanied by the Guardian of Souls and Lord Executioner at all times. The second little group that you're going to have is the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed with 5 Hex Wraiths and a Black Coach. So you kind of have this one big block of infantry, and then you have a really fast mounted sort of assault on one flank. That leaves everyone else. Lady Olinda is usually going to be with a 3 Spirit Host, so she basically has 9 extra wounds and a 3+ ward to try and keep her alive so she can carry on doing what she does best. You have 5 sort of Hex Wraiths who can just float around and be a support as and where needed, capture off a fast objective, and you have Ulrich the Drowner, who is sort of one of the perfect support pieces for being able to get your mobility online through his command trait and being able to teleport himself and units around the table. So if things really shift and you need to get someone somewhere really quick, he is the main key to that. And on sort of turn 2, turn 3, once we start setting up this sort of mortal wound potential, Ulrich is one of the keys to be able to sort of be able to fire off a ton of mortal wounds in one go. But let's have a first look at the main thing. And that will be the 20 block of Grimghast Reapers. Now, as I said, this list is a very difficult one to pilot, and say if you're going up against someone who isn't very aggressive, they're sort of more like a castle army, so someone like a Lumineth, or maybe it's a shooty Stormcast list, you can be very, very aggressive. What I would usually do is recommend sort of deploying everything on the table when you can, leaving the Guardian of Souls, the Lord Executioner in the Underworlds, through your ability to be able to take 3 units off the table, put them in reserves, and then what you're going to do is have your 20 Grimghast Reapers sort of in the centre. You're going to have Ulrich on the table as well. And then turn 1, what you can do is you can use Ulrich's command to teleport himself and 20 Grimghast Reapers up onto an objective in the enemy's front line. It's a threat that you've put in their face and they can't really ignore it. Now what you're going to do is when you teleport the Reapers, this is the part that gets quite difficult, but you're going to want to leave gaps inside the unit so that the Lord Executioner and the Guardian of Souls can come out of reserve in the middle of the unit. The Lord Executioner is a really underrated unit, I think, and that is because of his staring death in the face ability. Now at the start of the combat phase, you can pick one enemy unit within 3 inches of the Lord Executioner, and you subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made by that unit until the end of the phase, which is great, because what you're going to do is you're going to chuck these 20 Grimghast Reapers onto an objective so they're scoring something for you. You've put them right in front of the enemy as well, so they can't ignore them. And the enemy is going to charge in and try and take the Reapers down and take that objective off you. And the Lord Executioner, if you position him just right at the start of the combat phase, is going to be able to go, nope, you're within 3 inches of me, I'm going to make you -1 to wound. Now a lot of things in the game give bonuses to hit, but not a lot of things give +1 to wound. So that's a really nice debuff to get to make your Reapers a lot more tankier, because you're going to make that unit -1 to wound. As well as that, I know you're going to get hit hard and heavy first in that turn, but you're going to be able to use things like Discorporate to hopefully give yourself that 5+ ward, and cutting down 20 Reapers on a 4+ Ethereal with a 5+ ward while they're also -1 to be wounded is quite a challenge. Now while you've put those 20 Reapers in the opponent's face, we also have the second block, which is the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed, 5 Hex Race and a Black Coach, which is sort of threat 2, and they move at absolutely lightning speed. And you're going to really make your opponent answer the question of who are they going to go for first. If they go for the Reapers, obviously the Reapers we can tank up, and you're going to set up on the flank with your fast guy, so it's kind of, if they go into the Reapers and fail to kill them all, not only are the Reapers going to hit them back, but in your next turn, that entire flank of fast units is going to collapse and cause a lot of damage. Now when you set up the teleport for Alrich as well, don't forget that Alrich the Drowner has a 3-inch reach with his Ore, and his Ore is probably one of the best hero combat profiles for a support piece that I've ever seen. Alrich has a 3-inch reach with his Ore, he does 4 attacks on 3s and 3s. Because your Guardian of Souls is going to be in there, he's also getting +1 to wound, so he's basically 3s and 2s with -2 rend and D3 damage, which is absolutely fantastic. And again, if you're utilising that reach, you can have him a layer behind in the Reapers so the enemy can't hit him, but he can hit over the top. Your Reaper block is also going to be +1 to wound because of the Guardian's sort of Aura Lantern. So your Grimghast Reapers are going to be able to hit on 4s, wound on 2s. And they also get +1 attack if there's more than 5 enemies in the target unit, which more often than not enemies will probably be charging you with more than 5 guys. If it's not more than 5 guys, then between Alrich and the Reapers I would bank you on being able to take them out. And worst case scenario, because you're Nighthaunt, if you don't wipe the enemy and you don't want to be there anymore, you have built-in retreat and charge across your entire army, so you can always take the Reapers out, go and deal with something else, and then you can bring the Hex Race in to mop up the sort of 1 or 2 enemy models that might be left and still outnumber them on said objective. The other reason I really like the Grimghast Reapers is because that bonus is built in. That means when we're taking the charge, even in the enemy's turn, you're still getting that +1 attack. Things like Bladeghast, Revenants and all that are really cool, because obviously they get their extra attacks, but theirs is built in on charging, having to do things. Grimghast Reapers is just, if there's enough enemies there, doesn't matter whose turn it is, then they're getting their bonus. Now obviously this is all multiplied up in your turn, because when you're charging into the enemy, even if you just move back a couple of inches so you're out of combat range, then you charge back in, you're going to be getting your Wave of Terror debuffs off, and you're going to have the Grimghast Reapers, the Lord Executioner getting in, and Alrich as well. So that's 3 rolls on Wave of Terror just from that sort of one-man unit there, and with all those stacks put up. Probably not going to be putting the Guardian of Souls into combat, but you really could if you wanted to, if you favour your chances, and get a 4th roll on the Wave of Terror there, and between your sort of Stun, Shriek and Petrify, you should be able to pick anything apart with those 4 guys. So that's sort of that block number 1. Now in block number 2 we have the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed, and we've given him the Spiteful Spirit and also the Soulfire Ring. So for those who aren't familiar with the setup of this combination, basically on the War Scroll of the Knight of Shrouds himself, he has the Stolen Hours ability, which is at the end of the combat phase, if any enemy models were slain by attacks with this unit's Sword of Stolen Hours, in that phase you can heal 1 wound allocated to the unit, and you can add 1 to the wounds characteristic of the unit. Now the Knight of Shrouds on Steed starts with 6 wounds for his characteristic, so if you were to slay someone in a round of combat, you now not only heal 1 wound that turn if you were damaged, but your wounds characteristic total now goes up to 7. and that happens at the end of every turn that you kill a enemy unit. Model, sorry, not unit. You don't have to kill a whole unit, you just have to kill one model to be able to get that. Now the Sword of Stolen Hours has a really decent stat line, to be honest. It's 5 attacks, 3s, -1 and 2 damage, so it's really good at cutting through chaff, which is the main thing you're going to be doing. You want your Grimghast Reapers and your sort of Lord Executioner being in the thick of the fight against a sort of tougher enemy unit, and you want your Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed to be there so he can sort of zip in with his 12-inch movement and cut the enemy down in sort of their weak spots, or used as a supporting piece. If the Grimghast Reapers get caught into something really nasty, then you can throw the Knight of Shrouds in sort of on the side. Again, because you're Nighthaunt, you're retreat and charge, no one can lock you down, so you can really get your easy pickings. You can sit behind your 5 Hex Wraiths, use the Hex Wraiths as a screen, then in your next turn you can put the Knight of Shrouds as and where you need him. Now, as we spoke about with the Sword of Stolen Hours, like I said, he's going to be healing 1, he's also going to be gaining 1 to his total wounds characteristic. His Spiteful Spirit command trait is at the end of the combat phase, if any wounds that were allocated to the Knight of Shrouds are not negated during that phase, you can roll a number of dice equal to the wounds characteristic of this general, and for each 4+, each enemy unit within 6 inches of the general suffers 1 mortal wound. So let's just say you got hurt this turn and you didn't even kill anything, so you're still on your 6 wounds characteristic. You know, we haven't buffed him up in any way. That would mean if he takes a wound and he's still alive at the end of the combat phase, then you roll a dice for each enemy unit within 6 inches. So if there's multiple units, you're hitting everyone within 6, and then you get to roll 6 dice, and for each 4+ you inflict a mortal wound. So on his base stat line, he's basically being able to do 3 mortal wounds to everyone within 6 if he gets hurt. Now this stacks up nicely with that Sword of Stolen Hours ability, because as his wounds characteristic goes up, you get to roll more dice. So that means, say if you got him up to 8 wounds at the end of the turn that he got hurt, you're now rolling 8 dice, and on average you're going to be doing 4 mortal wounds. Obviously if you spike that roll and you can roll 8 dice, you can inflict sort of 6-7 mortal wounds on every enemy unit within 6 inches. So you have that ability to make your Knight of Shrouds really explode and do a lot of damage. And again, if you're picking on sort of weak enemies there, sort of a little 5 wound wizard, 10 sort of battle line, something like 10 marauders that aren't really that tough, something that might just do a wound or 2 to him but isn't really a threat to killing him outright, then they're just going to sort of, you kill a few of them off, they hit you, you then get to explode and hopefully wipe the last of them out, or you just take them down to like the last guy or something, so then the threat or the screen is pretty much gone. Don't forget that he's going to be rocking around with 5 Hex Wraiths who can then throw in their little bit of damage, and you've also got a black coach on that flank as well. Now the nice little part to the end of this combination is the artifact that we've given him, which is the Soulfire Ring. So not only do you get to heal 1 wound when you kill someone and you add 1 to your wounds characteristic, now you're exploding if you get hurt but not slain. But the Soulfire Ring allows him at the end of the combat phase, if you slayed any enemy models with the general, he gets to heal D6 wounds. So it basically means if your Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Sea doesn't get 1 shot, he's just going to be healing like crazy, because you get 1 from your Sword of Stolen Hours plus 6 D6 wounds back from the ring, and then your wounds characteristic is also going to be going up, so you can try and keep him at max wounds and also be rolling more for that Spiteful Spirit trait. So that turns our 130 points Knight of Shroud into a sort of screen destroyer, to be honest. Like I said, you want to be picking the units for him to get into. He's not going to be sort of taking down Mega Gargants, he's not going to be fighting sort of your tooled up enemy hammer units, because he doesn't want to get hit back too hard, but he's absolutely perfect at taking out sort of weak enemy chaff. Now, the other thing that I spoke about was, like I said, he's going to be rolling around with 5 Hex Wraiths and a black coach, and this leans into what I was talking about with the Emerald Host earlier. The mortal wound potential in this list is absolutely great. You're going to be rolling for the Emerald Host on enemy units, and on 2+, they're going to take D3 mortal wounds. You have impact hits with your Hex Wraith and the black coach, so every time they finish a charge move, you again get to roll a dice, and on a 2+, they take D3 mortal wounds, and that's the same for the coach and the Hex Wraith. So between 2 units of Hex Wraith and a black coach, on 3 dice, if you get 3 2+, you can inflict 3d3 mortal wounds. You're going to be doing 4d3 mortal wounds with your Emerald Host. And then we also have Lady Ollander. Now, Lady Ollander has been a staple of my Nighthaunt lists ever since the first book came out and ever since her model dropped, mainly because I think she looks absolutely amazing. I love seeing her just floating around the middle of the battle, causing mayhem, but in this new 3rd edition tome, they really made her awesome. She has 7 wounds with a 4+ ethereal save, and she has the Grave Sands of Time, which give her base ward of 4+. So she is one of the toughest heroes in this book, because everyone else just has a 6+ ward, and she is sitting on the 4+, which is really, really nice. Now, her attacks aren't anything too terrible, but they're nothing to write home about. She's got 4 attacks on 3s and 3s, -2 rend and 2 damage. She also has 6 attacks with the sort of Maiden's Claws, 4s and 4s, -1 rend and 1 damage. But that's not the main thing we're taking her for. The main thing we're taking her for is her ability to lift the veil. And what happens is at the start of your shooting phase, this is an ability by the way, it's not a shooting attack, so you're able to target enemy heroes with this, which is one of the keys. At the start of the shooting phase, you pick one enemy unit within 12 inches of this unit and roll a dice. On a 2+, that unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the roll. Add 1 to the number of the mortal wounds the target suffers if it's terrified. Terrifying is if the enemy is already within 3 inches of another Nighthaunt unit. So you get to add 1 to the number of the mortal wounds the target suffers if it's terrified, and if any enemy models are slain by this ability, you can heal D3 wounds allocated to this unit for each enemy model that was slain. So if you're being able to pick on sort of little one wound enemies in a unit, then you can potentially heal up to D3 wounds for each model that you've slain. So if Lady Ollander goes down to 1 wound, she kills a couple of guys, you get to heal 2d3 wounds back. So with her 4+, and being able to heal herself, she's also one of the toughest in that regard for sustain as well as just inbuilt tankiness. Now that's also a really nice way of doing mortal wounds. It's basically d6 mortal wounds unless you roll a 1 and then nothing happens. And like I said, because you're just picking someone within 12 inches, that means that she's able to pick on enemy heroes. So again, you can really see this adding up now. We've got the 2 units of Hexerrace impact hits, Black Coach impact hits, Emerald Host is going off on enemy heroes. If Lady Ollander gets in close within that 12 inches, she's basically doing d6 as long as you can roll a 2+. If the enemy happens to be terrified at the same time, then you're getting +1 to that as well. So you can potentially do 7 mortal wounds to someone within 12 inches. As well as that, she's a 2-cast wizard. There's nothing too much to write home about this. The main reason that we've taken her is for lifting the veil, but she is a 2-cast wizard, so you can also throw out an Arcane Bolt, which is one of my favourite combinations and leans into why I've taken Spectral Tether as her spell. One of the things that I really like to do is the Black Coach with its new ability, where it starts with a dice, and every time someone is slain or flees of an enemy unit within 12 inches of the coach, you get to add +1. Now you put a dice next to the coach, it starts on a 1. Every time someone is on the enemy faction is slain or flees within 12 inches, you increase that by 1 to a maximum of 6. And when that's at 6, the Black Coach in the shooting phase can unleash the stored necromantic energy. And what you do is you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of the coach. On a 2+, they suffer 3d3 mortal wounds, and then you change that dice back to a 1. The Black Coach also has the Nimbus of Power ability, which allows it to, rather than make a normal move or retreat, it can just remove itself from the table and then redeploy itself anywhere on the table as long as it's outside of 9 of the enemy. Now back to Lady Ollander and Spectral Tether. Because you're casting your spells in the command phase, it's the first thing that you do. So Lady Ollander can be on the table, everything's going around, you've got your Reaper block fighting one thing, you've got your Black Coach and horses sort of going crazy on one flank, and then the enemy is obviously going to be able to react to you, they're going to try and stop your Reaper block, they're going to try and block off one side of the table. Turn 2, turn 3 is when this list really comes into its own. This is what you're going to be playing for, it's what you're going to be setting up for. And the reason for that is because if you set it up right, you can really flip the switch for this list. Now, Spectral Tether is the first thing that's going to start off this chain of events as long as it's set up correctly, because you know if you're getting Spectral Tether or not off before you do any of the following. But if your black coach is set up, so say it's got its 6 power on its nimbus, so it's ready to do its 3d3 mortal wounds to an enemy, what you can do is, if you really want to bully someone, you get Lady Ollander. She casts Spectral Tether, which is basically the same thing. She removes herself from the table. She reappears anywhere as long as she's outside of 9. That happens in the command phase. Then, at the start of the movement phase, what you're going to do is use Ulrich the Drowner's command to remove himself from the table, and then you can teleport the 3 spirit hosts along with a Lady Ollander. So him and her now have the protection of the spirit host, so you're not just chucking her out in the open. So now you've got Lady Ollander, Ulrich the Drowner, and 3 spirit hosts sort of taken off the table and set up anywhere outside of 9 of the enemy. Then what we're also going to be doing in the command phase, before we get to Ulrich, so Lady Ollander is going to cast Spectral Tether. If it goes off, she teleports herself to somewhere on the table. Now we have the Guardian of Souls who has the Midnight Tome. You can either try and cast the Terminexus Endless spell on its own, or the reason that we've got the Midnight Tome is because if the Grimghast Reapers don't need a heal or they don't need Seal of Shaiish, you can pop the Midnight Tome, which allows you to summon an endless spell, and your casting value is auto 12. So that lets us power out the Terminexus. And for those who don't know what the Terminexus does, it's a predatory endless spell. You set it up within 12 inches of a Nighthaunt wizard. It then moves 8. You can choose to reverse time or hasten time. If you reverse time, you heal D3 wounds allocated to each unit within 6 inches of the endless spell. And if you hasten time, you roll a dice for each unit within 6 inches of the endless spell, and they suffer D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 2+. So you teleport Lady Ollander using Spectral Tether. Then the Guardian of Souls can pop the Midnight Tome if you wanted to, or you can just try and cast it as it is. You can throw out the Terminexus into sort of the ranks of the enemy. Ulrich the Drowner is then going to use his command ability to teleport himself and the spirit hosts over to him and Lady Ollander, so they are now safe. And then the black coach can use the Nimbus power ability to take itself off the table and teleport somewhere else. So you now have them all stacked up. So if the coach is ready to go, you've got the Terminexus out. Lady Ollander is now there, so when it comes to your shooting phase, Lady Ollander can lift the veil. The black coach can pop off and hit something for 3d3 mortal wounds. She's basically doing d6 mortal wounds as long as you don't roll a 1. The Emerald Host has already gone off at the top of this battle round, and the Terminexus would have popped as well after it had moved. So you can absolutely nuke someone with mortal wounds, and because everything can teleport, so the black coach self-teleports, Lady Ollander's got the spell, and Ulrich can sort of take himself. Worst case scenario, you just don't use Ulrich for the spirit hosts, and if you fail Spectral Tether, Ulrich can take Lady Ollander, just the 2 of them. Obviously if you leave your spirit host behind, then you are vulnerable, so just be aware of that. If you really do need to get the mortal wounds off, like, you can break the back of the enemy's army in that turn 2, turn 3 if this is set up. Usually around turn 3 this is going to be when you pop it off, because turn 1 you're going to be setting your coach and your hex race up. Turn 2 they get in on the charge. You're going to probably power the coach up off the mortal wound impact alone, killing up to 6 enemies with just mortal wound impacts. And then on turn 3 you can just teleport the coach, teleport Ollander, and then Terminexus or not, I mean, hitting someone for 3d3 mortal wounds, d6 mortal wounds, and another d3 from your sub-faction is normally enough to lay out anyone but the very toughest enemy heroes or units, because it doesn't have to be a hero. Obviously it's great for hero sniping, but if the enemy's got something that's really, really tough, say it's like Stormcast Protectors, something that's got like a 2-up save, and there's 10 of them, so there's 30 wounds, but they've got no ward save, you can absolutely annihilate them. And because of the teleporting, they just can't stop it, because the coach gets to pick something within 12, Ollander's picking something within 12, the Terminexus can obviously just be moved within range. So the enemy really can't stop this. They can't sort of, unless they're really screened out and backboarded, but like I said, by turn 3 they're having to come to you to deal with the Reapers, to deal with your Hex Race, and because of your teleporting, it doesn't matter if you're locked up in combat, just as long as you're alive and on the table you can teleport off and get out that really nasty combo. And that is sort of the main sort of win condition behind this list. What you're doing is that turn 1, you're throwing up the Reapers, you've made them really defensive through the Lord Executioner, maybe a Discorporate if you need it. they still hit back really hard because of their innate ability to buff themselves. Guardian of Souls giving them +1 wound, and they're very fighty as they are. Then you've got the threat of all your fast movers who are going around capping the other objectives and are just being there sort of as a, you charge my Reapers, even if they, you know, worst case scenario, they killed all of your Reapers, you're still there with all those mortal wounds ready to charge in and deal with the enemy. You've got Lady Ollander who's floating around sort of doing her own thing, and that threat is there at all times. Knight of Shrouds, like I said, he's able to shred through little units on his own. I back him against anything that isn't really sort of super tough or super hard to kill. There are plenty of things in the game that he can go toe to toe with the Soulfire Ring and Spirit setup and deal with them easily. And yeah, that's just basically the main thing. It's just setting that up and breaking the enemy on that sort of turn 3, when you pull the trigger and you get all of these mortal wounds just get going at one go. So the opening turns, you've got the Emerald Host going off. If you get a few charges out on turn 2, like I said, you're doing mortal wounds here and there. It's that sort of chip damage going in. Resiliency wise as well, don't forget the Guardian of Souls. The reason that you have to choose between popping that Midnight Tome and casting the Terminexus is because a lot of the time you're probably going to be leaning on Spectral Lore, which is his War Scroll spell and has a casting value of 6. And what happens is you pick one friendly Nighthaunt summonable unit wholly within 24 inches of him, and you can heal d6 wounds, and if there are no wounds allocated to that unit, you can return a number of models with a combined wounds characteristic of that d6 or less. More often than not, you're going to be putting this on the Grimghast Reapers, so if they're taking lots of damage, you can heal d6 back to them. And Lady Ollander has her once per game pick all units board wide and return d6 slain models to the units, so that includes your Hex Wraiths as well. If your Hex Wraiths go down to like a single guy alive, you get to return d6 Hex Wraith to that unit, which is fantastic. It replenishes her own Spirit Host if you've lost Spirit Host through sort of bodyguarding or whatever it may be. So there is a little bit of durability in there, but yeah, you can really time that right. If you get your heals off on turn 2 and things aren't looking too bleak, then obviously you push through for that Terminexus with your Midnight Tome, and really setting up to inflict the damage that way. One of the other things I forgot to mention just quickly is also Auroch the Drowner is another impact hits as well. So we talked about his ore earlier with the 3-inch reach, which is great because he reaches over the top of the Reapers and then can obviously teleport out and go wherever he wants later on. But when he charges on a 2+, he also inflicts d3 mortal wounds onto the enemy, just like the Hex Race and just like the Coach does. And he also gets an extra d3 attacks on his ore as well. So you're setting up that turn 1 teleport with the Reapers like we spoke about. And then he can reach over the top, which is fine. And then in your turn, when you sort of retreat the Reapers out a little bit, charge them in to get that wave of terror, you can always charge Auroch around the side. Not only is he doing impact hits, but then he buffs himself, which is absolutely crazy that the damage that ore can do. When you think it goes up to like 7 odd attacks and they're d3 each with 2 rend, it's just mad that the ore does so much damage compared to some of the actual like swords and giant scythes in this list, but it is what it is. Another thing that I spoke about at the start, I think the last thing I'll talk about today for this list is, like I said, it's a very one that's hard to pilot, and you really need to see what's coming. The main thing I spoke about today, teleporting the Reapers in really aggressively, putting your heroes in the underworld and calling them down into the little pockets, is something that you know if you're playing against that castled army. If you're lining up against something like an Ironjaws or Blades of Khorne, then obviously you're not going to want to sort of challenge them in that way, because they will probably charge your entire army into said Reapers, annihilate them, and then you don't have too much board presence left. So what you want to do is, rather than put them in the thing and teleport them aggressively, you can put your heroes on the table, because it's completely optional, and this is where the experience will come in, whether you're an experienced Nighthaunt general or just player overall, is knowing to maybe put the Reapers out on the table normally, put the heroes into the unit rather than into the underworld, so they have that buff, so when the sort of Ironjaws pigs come screaming across the table, you can then get the -1 wound buff on them, debuff on them with the Lord Executioner. Then your Guardian of Souls is ready for turn 1, so if you're going second and you receive a turn 1 charge, then he's ready to start slinging out spells, returning dead guys, popping the Midnight Tome, whatever you might need. That way, because obviously when they come out of the underworlds, they've missed the first command phase, so the Guardian of Souls won't be casting any spells on the turn that he comes out of the underworlds. So it's really a matter of seeing your opponent's tactics and just being able to flip it on one side and react or set yourself up, knowing and still waiting. It still goes down to that sort of turn 3 is really when you're going to pop all the damage, and you're just sort of setting it up for that when you can get those mortal wound spectacular display off. But setting up for that sort of turn 1, turn 2 will really come down to a matter of experience, because if you play your cards wrong and you get sort of key things get picked out, maybe you've positioned your Reapers and the Lord Executioner in such a way that the enemies just tag the unit instead, so you don't get the -1 wound off and then they pile a load of damage through. You've really got to see it coming. Like a Gargant could probably do that quite easily. Obviously if they've got big units then not so much, because they've got their reach, etc. But if they can tag a Gargant into your Reaper unit out of the Lord Executioner range, that's going to hurt. So it's just being able to see those sort of little changes and affect the list in that way, but you're still mainly setting up for that sort of Grimghast Reaper block, fast moving flank that can't get locked down because of your retreat and charge, setting the coach up, getting Olinda, teleporting in and just crippling the opponent in that turn 3, and that's really where this list comes into its own. But that turn 1, turn 2 is really down to you in setting that up and just being careful, reading your opponent's game plan, how aggressive you might need to be to block them into their own deployment with the Reapers, the fast moving Hex race, or whether you sort of hang back, wait for a little bit, let them come forward, and then gives you that space to be able to charge in, get behind the enemy lines and spring your trap. But that is it for today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this. Thank you so much for listening to my absolute rambles. If you have made it all the way to the end, I know this was a very long one, but this list, like I said, on paper you can sort of see it, but it's a very difficult one to explain my thought process and why I've taken what I've taken, and really setting up for that big mortal wound combo, because this list will fall apart if it's not kind of set up in that way. Using the heroes in the underworld, etc. The teleport is kind of a tricky one that you might not have seen just reading the list through. So thank you very much if you've made it this long, and as always guys, stay safe, happy wargaming. Psst. Hey you! Did you know that Lakey Wargames now has an official eBay store? You can buy yourself all kinds of pre-painted and new on sprue hobby goodness and support the channel at the same time. There's a link in the description below if you want to check it out. I'd greatly appreciate it, and it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Okay, see you in the next one.